Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. John Bossetti, founder of ESI, that's Eye Surgeons International, and I've been invited to speak to you about our mission, the elimination of needless blindness in Zambia. It's great to be here virtually on tape. I'm coming to you from the beautiful Napa Valley where I live, practice ophthalmology, and run ESI. So you know who's doing the talking. Here's a photo of me. That's me in the blue cap, made for me by a kind and talented seamstress in Zimba, Zambia, a country in southern sub-Saharan Africa, where I have had the great privilege of working in the local eye hospital. We'll talk more about Zambia and that seamstress later. First, I wanted to say thank you, Corza Medical, for asking me to share what our organization does and what we aspire to do. It's an honor and a pleasure because all of you already contribute to our efforts. Physicians, like me, try to cure people, and you give us the tools to do that. Now, I'm a particular kind of physician, an ophthalmologist, and what my team and I do is try to help people see better, or if they're blind, we try to help them see again. In the developed world, countries like ours, we do a good job between the doctors and all of those like you who support us, including very importantly the medical industry, in providing the excellent care for the vast majority of our people. We are fortunate. Where we live gives us many advantages. However, there are many whose birthplace comes with many disadvantages. The vast majority have very poor or no access to care if they were born in the wrong place. So we, that is Eye Surgeons International, we try to fix that. We try to level the playing field when it comes to the thing that we do, help people see. Because we believe that where you live shouldn't determine if you can see or if you will go blind. Well, that's a bit nebulous, isn't it? So to explain this better, I'd like to tell you a story that, with your help, can have a happy ending. Our story is set in Zimba, in the country of Zambia, a very poor country in southern sub-Saharan Africa. The story is about the Zimba Eye Hospital and Clinic, a small hospital where eye surgeons from around the world have been treating and curing eye disease for over 30 years. Note the very, very skinny cow wandering next to the sign. Wandering cows are going to enter into our story again a little later. Our story is about trying to eliminate blindness that we can fix. That is, prevent or cure. We call that unnecessary or needless blindness. That's the basic plot for our story. But let's take a brief pause from our story to watch a short film created during one of our recent trips to Zimba. This film will set the stage for our story and help you understand it more fully. Okay, I'm back. I hope that brief film shot on our recent trip to Zambia helps you understand what it's like to be one of us, a Westerner who goes to help. Now let's continue our story by learning about a woman who came to Zimba for that help, someone we met on that last trip. Let me tell you about Mrs. Kaduta. When Mrs. Kaduta, and she allows us to call her Mrs. K, when she arrived at our clinic, her daughter, Linda, had to lead her by the hand. They traveled for 3 days to reach the only eye hospital serving 5 million people across southern Zambia and many of the neighboring countries. And that hospital is our Zimba Eye Hospital. As Mrs. K came into the clinic, I watched her stretch out a hand to feel for the wall as she was guided down the hallway toward the preoperative exam room. Her daughter Linda helped her into the chair. Just watching Mrs. K move told me what my examination confirmed. She was completely blind from mature cataracts in both eyes. As you know, a cataract occurs when the protein inside the natural lens of the eye become damaged and turn hazy. The natural lens is an M&M shaped and sized structure that sits just behind the iris, the colored part of the eye. Why do these proteins become damaged? When my patients here in the US ask me that, I say cataracts are caused by birthday cake. And they say, really? And I say, yes. And then they get it. We get cataracts with age. The wear and tear of aging causes the proteins to become hazy, just as cooking clear egg whites, which are also made of protein, causes the egg whites to become white, opaque. In Africa, one of the reasons there are so many blind people is that there are other causes of cataract other than just aging, including poor nutrition and high levels of ultraviolet light exposure. And what do they have in Africa? That's right, poor nutrition, lots of ultraviolet light, and not too many sunglasses. So back to Mrs. K. When I talked to her, she said that her eyesight had been slowly worsening over many years and she had been completely blind for 5 years. She thereafter became totally dependent on others for even the simplest tasks. She had to be led around her village by her daughter to keep from stumbling into open cooking fires or being knocked over by wandering cattle or oxen. Amazingly, wandering animals of all kind, farm animals, are a real danger in Zimbabwe and all over sub-Saharan Africa. In many parts of the world, blindness is more than a medical condition. It steals independence, burdens families, and limits entire communities. That's why in Africa, a blind person is called a mouth with no hands. These people need food, but they cannot contribute to their family's survival. Before she lost her eyesight, in fact, Mrs. K worked as a seamstress, earning an income for her family. But after going blind, she could no longer do that work or help out on the family farm. Her daughter, Linda, who was with her when I met her, had to take care of her. And Linda also had the responsibility to run their small farm, raising maize or corn, fruit, vegetables, and goats. All of this left Linda no time at all to take and sell their produce at the farmer's market, eliminating their only source of income. So Linda's daughter, Mrs. K's granddaughter, Susan, whose face Mrs. K had never really seen clearly, Susan had to drop out of school to help with the farm. The hopes that Susan could continue in school and be the first in the family to graduate from high school were dashed. I came to learn that this was a very common story. It's easy for us to imagine the effects of blindness on one person, but the devastating effects spread across 3 generations of these families. 3 lives are ruined, and a family's hope for the future is destroyed. I told Mrs. K we could help, and it was likely she would see again if we did an operation. We nodded yes. She made her mark on a consent form, but it seemed that that was done with resignation. There was no fear. She clasped my hand and she told me that she trusted me but it seemed she did not believe that this darkness, which had lasted so long, could possibly be lifted. The next day, she underwent a 15-minute cataract surgery, one of many we did that day. It went well. At the end of the operation, her eye was bandaged tightly shut to help it heal. This type of bandage blocks all vision. She would have to wait to know if she would see again. The next morning, we removed her eye patch. She hesitated, blinking as her eyes adjusted. Then slowly she looked around, first in some confusion, then in astonishment. Tears welled in her eyes. She smiled a beautiful smile, first in disbelief, then in joy. She reached out to her daughter to touch her, seeming to need that contact to confirm that this person, who she had not seen in a year, was really her daughter. Then, overcome with emotion, Mrs. K began dancing with joy, and that was a beautiful sight. In an instant, she had regained her independence, dignity, and her role as a productive part of the family rather than a burden. Her daughter was freed from the burden of full-time caregiving, and her granddaughter, who had been a straight A student, was able to return to school. The family was back on track. So blindness doesn't just affect individuals. This is a really important point. It shatters families, cripples entire communities. Curing blindness has the opposite effect. It restores livelihoods, education, and economic stability. And I'll tell you something more. I've done over 15,000 cataract surgeries in my career, but the feeling you get when someone gets their vision back, that never grows old. It is my favorite thing. So now you've heard Mrs. K's story. Perhaps you can imagine what it's like to be her. But let's do an experiment, a thought experiment that will allow you to understand it even better. Albert Einstein was famous for proposing thought experiments. It's how he came up with his theory of relativity. And who are we to argue with Albert Einstein? So, here's our thought experiment. Close your eyes. Tight. Keep them closed, don't peek. This is what it's like to have severe cataracts. You can tell if the lights are on or off, but that's about it. In Zambia, we see many people whose cataracts are so dense they can't even do that. Their world is completely dark. They can't tell if it is day or if it is night. Mrs. K was like that. So imagine navigating life like this, not for a few seconds, but forever. Could you find your way home? Could you cook? Could you work? Could you take care of your children? Now imagine you live in a place with rocky, irregular, unpaved roads, no guide dogs, no beeping crosswalks, no running water, no one to cook for you. There's no indoor plumbing. Finding your way to the outhouse is a daily struggle. Farm animals roam the roads. Open cooking fires burn in the street. Tree branches with long razor-sharp thorns grow along every path. Every step is a hazard. Every day is a struggle. This is the daily reality for 40 million people worldwide, equivalent to the entire population of Canada, who are completely blind. Many hundreds of millions more have very severe sight loss, sort of blindness, but still extremely disabling. Okay, that's enough. Open your eyes. That was a bit over a minute. Think about what it would be like if it was the rest of your life. 90% of blind individuals live in poor countries, and Zambia is very poor, with a GDP of approximately $1,300 per capita, about $3.50 per day. Most people in the rural South, where Zimba is, are much poorer, most subsisting on less than $1 per day. So there are a lot of blind people in the world, 90% of whom live in poor countries. This slide shows us the prevalence of vision loss in different regions of the world. I want to highlight two main facts that jump right out from this map. The regions colored dark blue have very low rates of vision loss. we can see that this happy situation exists for us, the developed world. And this is what I meant at the beginning of the talk when I said we are doing a good job at home. All of us are preventing and treating problems that cause loss of vision. So there are relatively few people who can't see in our countries. The regions in the dark orange color have rates of vision loss which are the highest in the world, many times higher than in the developed world. As you see, this is the situation on the Indian subcontinent and in sub-Saharan Africa. Zambia sits right in the middle of southern sub-Saharan Africa and has a very high prevalence of vision loss, as do the countries that surround it. This is why we have chosen to work there. There are many blind people in this region. This is where help is needed most in trying to prevent or reverse avoidable blindness. The takeaway is that in poor countries, there are many blind people. In fact, 36 million out of the 40 million blind people worldwide live in poor countries. And remember, there are hundreds of millions more who have very severe vision loss, but who are not completely blind. But these people still have tremendous difficulties with daily activities as well. And here's the startling fact: 80% of this blindness is unnecessary, either preventable or curable. And further, over half of all blindness, and for people who's completely blind, that's 20 million people worldwide, over half of that is caused by cataracts, a completely curable condition. 20 million people across the world are completely blind, and it's curable. Remember how it was with your eyes closed, blind, thinking about how life would be if you were living in a place like Zimba? Irregular roads, animals running across the street, fires, life's difficult. Well, what if the cause was cataracts, like Mrs. K, but you were told nothing could be done? That would feel bad. That would feel terrible. But remember, there's good news. As we saw with Mrs. K, cataracts, the leading cause of unnecessary blindness, can be cured with a 15-minute surgery for about $50 a person. Costs about $25 to do one cataract surgery. People need it in both eyes, $50 per person. So it's possible to cure every single case of cataract blindness worldwide. That's most of the unnecessary blindness right there. We don't need new technology. There are no new discoveries necessary. Yet, millions of people remain blind, not because the cure doesn't exist, but because these millions cannot access the cure. Because safe and effective cataract surgery is not available where they live. Why can't they get cataract surgery to cure their blindness? Because there are not enough eye surgeons where they live. In high income countries, there are about 75 to 150 or so, 75 to 150 ophthalmologists per million people. That's what this slide that you see shows. The bubbles of different sizes represent how many ophthalmologists per million people in those countries. In the rich world, as I said, there's about 75 to 150 per million. The bubbles you see, the big ones in the United States shows 80 per million. In Europe, about 71. Really, the most recent updates show anywhere from 75 to 150 ophthalmologists per million people in the rich world. Look down in sub-Saharan Africa. You see a tiny little blue dot representing 2 ophthalmologists per million people, the worst ratio anywhere in the world. This next slide that you see shows 150 doctors, more or less, standing on the left, 2 lonely doctors on the right, trying to take care of a million people. Unfortunately, as I said, that 2 per million is an overestimate. Many of the eye surgeons lack proper training, equipment, or facilities, making it impossible to provide the care their patients desperately need. It's really more like 1 per million in most parts of sub Saharan Africa, the worst ratio in the world, which is why we are concentrating on sub Saharan Africa. And that is why desperate people like Mrs. K travel for days to reach an eye surgeon, because for millions, there is no ophthalmologist nearby. That was the reality that we saw firsthand in Zambia. So, what's the answer? It's simple. We need more well trained eye surgeons doing more cataract operations every day for years and years. How do we do that? That is the question. And that's the one that troubled me from my first day on my first trip to Zambia. I remember that first day. At the end of that first day of surgery in Zambia, I lay awake in a hot, dark room trying to sleep. We had done a lot of great operations. Our large group of post op patients were camped outside the hospital, and I knew that they were going to see better tomorrow. So, why did I feel trouble? I didn't expect that because already I knew it wasn't enough and couldn't be enough. There were so many people that needed help and so few of us to help them. We would never get to them all. Most of the people in Zambia and its surrounding countries who are blind would never see an eye surgeon. They would die blind. We needed more eye surgeons. How to get there? Well, I thought about my own journey that had led me to that place at the Zimba Eye Hospital in Zambia. It had taken years of specialized training, and it required the luck, in a sense, of being born and raised in a country that had invested in medical education, hospitals, and infrastructure. Indeed, I can remember the first time I ever observed a cataract surgery procedure when I was still a medical student. It was a delicate ballet of an operation that restores our most precious sense permanently. It's the best operation in the world. From that moment, I was hooked. That is what I wanted to do with my life. And it was the right choice for me. I love my job. I have happy patients. I've taught many young surgeons this brilliant and beautiful operation at my alma mater. But even before working in Africa, I knew of the lack of access to cataract surgery and that the lives of millions of unnecessarily blind people and the lives of their families are shortened and made miserable because of it. I knew that blindness causes poverty and poverty causes blindness. And in this way, this most curable of major disabilities can prevent whole societies from developing. So we as my wife, Nancy Jameson, also an ophthalmologist, and me, you see us there in the picture, we traveled to Zambia at the invitation of some wonderful partners known as International Vision Volunteers who run the Zimba Eye Hospital to help. We wanted to help. What we saw there, as encapsulated by Mrs. K's story, changed our lives. Being immersed with the people, seeing their suffering, which they bear with immense stoicism, and realize that when you leave, there will be more blind people in the region than when you arrived, because more people are going blind every day than all the surgeons in Zambia, including you, can cure in a day. Well, that makes you lay awake at night. Okay. So does the heat and humidity. Indeed, I calculated that if every Western ophthalmologist that I knew came to Zambia to operate in the way that I did, it wouldn't have been enough. We are temporary workers. It hadn't worked in the past, and it cannot work that way. What is needed is an ever increasing number of local ophthalmologists who would stay in Zambia and the surrounding countries and dedicate their entire careers to restoring sight. That realization led to the creation of our ambitious three-phase project to greatly increase the delivery of high-quality eye care and specifically cataract surgery to Zambia and the surrounding countries. Phase one consists of increasing the number and quality of surgeries we do in our current hospital, the Zimba Eye Hospital and Clinic. We are well underway and making good progress. Just this past November, a shipping container full of new equipment arrived in Zimba, and there was an ESI team of nurses, techs, and doctors on hand to train our local staff and doctors to use this new equipment. New and better techniques were taught, more and better surgery was done. And in fact, Corza Medical has been a major partner in this effort. One of the biggest problems that we had was a lack of cataract surgery instruments. Our budget is very limited, and the instruments we had were few and worn. The number of cataract operations we could do in a day was decreased by these worn instruments and the need to sterilize them between every case. Thankfully, through the generosity of Corza Medical, we now have 10 full and complete cataract surgery sets. This has increased the number of cases we can do in a day by 50%. Overall, with the improvements in equipment, new techniques, better organization, these wonderful Corza medical instruments, and the addition of an ophthalmic nurse for the first time, we have increased our yearly volume of cataract surgery from 750 to 1,500 per year. That's a big improvement. We are really thankful for it, but it's not near enough to dent the backlog of blindness, which is why through improved technology, we now have added also an increase in our teaching capacities. With the new microscopes and with high definition video teaching screens, we have doubled the number of young surgeons we train from 4 to 8 per year. This has added ever increasing numbers of safe and effective operations being done across the region by our trainees. We estimate that this contributes an additional 2,000 cases per year. If we're able to secure funding, we will add a second full-time local ophthalmologist who will be working year-round teaching and doing surgery, and also build a wet lab to further improve our teaching capabilities. But this will still not be enough to solve the problem. Fact is, our current facility is much too small, and it is essentially at its maximum capacity for teaching and surgery. It cannot be expanded. It's bursting at the seams. So, as phase two, which is well into the planning stage, we are building a new, much larger ophthalmology hospital and teaching campus to increase our capacity of 5,000 sight restoring surgeries each year. You see the overhead image. The red blocks simply indicate where the new hospital will be located, quite close to our current one. And in the next slide, the blueprints represent a modern teaching campus that we plan to build. In fact, I'll be going there very shortly in March, both to work and teach in the usual way and to meet with a team of architects and engineer to develop further our plans. This new facility will allow us to expand our teaching program, which will consist of an expanded ophthalmology cataract surgery fellowship and residency program to train and graduate 16 fellows and 5 well-qualified ophthalmologists annually. We will also begin to train some of the very first subspecialty ophthalmologists in southern sub-Saharan Africa, including specialists in retinal diseases, glaucoma, and pediatric eye diseases. Ultimately, it will be these graduates who will be the ones that will solve the problem. If we can help them establish productive practices all over the region, just as I and my fellow residents did, and young doctors and surgeons do all over the developed world, then they will take care of their people and there will be very little unnecessary blindness. To achieve this, a third phase will involve partnering with graduates of our program to help them establish self-sustaining offices and facilities of their own to deliver care not only in Zambia, but in all of the countries that surround it, each of which has its own crisis of untreated and unnecessary blindness. Our long-term vision is to create a self-sustaining eye care system where high-quality treatment and training spread throughout sub-Saharan Africa. I hope this story has helped you understand the problem of unnecessary blindness in Zambia and sub-Saharan Africa, how it affects people like you and me, who just want to live life as productive members of society and be with and care for those we love. I hope I've helped you understand that this is a solvable problem. I know I've repeated this, but cataract surgery takes 15 minutes. It costs as little as $50 per person. Yet millions remain blind because the world, and that's all of us, have not yet made this a priority. By way of a kind of calculation to bring this to a concrete idea, for $1 billion, equivalent to the revenue generated by the Super Bowl, just one Super Bowl, we could eliminate cataract blindness worldwide. That's the elimination of blindness for 40 million people who could be permanently cured. Now that would be a great fundraiser. In Zambia, $20 million could cure every person who has severe and blinding cataract. That's 400,000 people. At this year's price of $8 million for a 30-second Super Bowl ad, we could pay to cure all 400,000 people for what it would cost to buy 75 seconds of Super Bowl advertising time. Now, I liked some of the Super Bowl ads, but wow, I'd like to cure those 400,000 people even more. You know, we've done big things before. We eliminated smallpox. That was a worldwide scourge, killed millions of people. We can eliminate unnecessary blindness if we work together. Because as Helen Keller said, and she knew something about blindness, just because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something that I can do. Each of us can do something, whether through advocacy, financial support, or spreading awareness. We all have a role to play in ending needless blindness. Corza Medical and Eye Surgeons International have already worked together to give sight to those in need. With your continued help, we can and we must do more. Let's do it, because sight is more than just vision. It's independence, it's dignity, and life itself. Thank you for listening. It was a pleasure to be here this evening.
What a marvelous God. He has done marvelous things for